On a rainy autumn evening, as raindrops tapped against the window in a dimly lit workshop, an old craftsman's hands were repairing one last umbrella when the doorbell softly rang. The young woman who entered carried a memento from her mother in her arm. Tonight, I will tell you a story where time slows down, hands work gently, and memories come alive among old fabrics, and perhaps you too will surrender yourself to sleep in the quiet of this rainy evening. I wonder where you were listening to this story. Perhaps in your bed, perhaps in a quiet corner, and if you wish, you can tell me about it below. But for now, just relax and listen to the stories. In November of 1887, in the Clerkenwell district of London, right in the middle of 82nd Street, in an unforgettable corner of history, there was a small workshop. This workshop was hidden between two-story brick buildings, its display window constantly covered in condensation, its door slightly warped by the weight of the years. Yet it had stood in the same place for decades, with the same determination. The dark red bricks that made up the building had succumbed to London's infamous fog, thick soot, tireless soil, and incessant dampness, taking on an almost brownish tone over time. Even on the sunniest days, the building carried a slightly gloomy air, as if the melancholy of the years had settled upon it. But within this gloom, strangely, there was a comforting sense of security, a warmth reminiscent of the depth of aged want. The window sills had once been painted pure white, perhaps years ago, perhaps on a spring morning, but the paint was now cracked, its edges yellowed, aged by the touch of time. Although the wood beneath was beginning to show, these sills still retained their strength, had not lost their resilience, much like the steadfast spirit of the craftsman who worked within. The display window was not large, perhaps 1.5 meters wide, 1 meter high. A modest, behind the window, carefully selected umbrellas, various canes, small leather bags, and colorful pieces of fabric were displayed. Each was meticulously arranged, patiently dusted, skillfully placed. The window glass was thick, one of those sturdy panes from a bygone era, its surface marked by slight ripples and indistinct curves. Someone looking in from outside couldn't see clearly inside. They could only make out vague shapes, shadows dancing with the light, and shimmering silhouettes. This evening, the window was completely fogged up. Outside, a sharp cold had enveloped the town, while inside, the warmth radiating from the small cast-iron stove in the corner of the workshop gently warmed the air. This temperature difference had created a thin, almost transparent layer of moisture on the glass, as if the workshop were breathing onto the window. The door was made of dark brown wood, its surface slightly weathered by years of use, but still sturdy and imposing. It had a shiny brass knocker and an old but functional handle. At the top of the door hung a small bell on a thin chain. When the door opened, this bell would ring with a soft, melodic sound. The tone of the bell was not shrill, not at all jarring to the ear. On the contrary, it had a soft, almost pastoral melody. It was reminiscent of the noon bells of a distant rural church sound, like a gentle tinkling at the gates of heaven. This sound did not break the deep silence inside the workshop. It blended with it, danced with it. At the threshold of the door was a stone step, worn down by countless customers coming and going over the years. The center of the step had become slightly hollowed out by time and the friction of feet, each step leaving a mark, each visit adding a story to this stone. A small puddle of water, usually formed in this hollow because Clerkenwell streets were paved with stone, and when it rained, the water found its way through the small grooves and cracks, flowing towards these low points. It was approaching 6 o'clock that evening. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken. The sun had long since set behind the horizon, but the sky had not yet turned completely black. It was that uncertain twilight hour, that quiet, peaceful moment of transition when a color wavering between gray and purple slowly spread across the sky. The street lamps began to be lit, one by one, and the yellow lights flickered faintly behind the windows. It had been raining since morning, incessantly without pause, but it wasn't a heavy rain. On the contrary, the drops fell from the sky with a steady, monotonous, almost meditative rhythm. This sound could be heard even inside the workshop, the gentle, repetitive tapping of drops on the windows, the soft trickling of water flowing down the gutter from the roof, the light but insistent thud of drops falling into puddles on the street. All these sounds combined, weaving a peaceful song over the city. The interior of the workshop was dimly lit, with 2 gas lamps burning with a low flame on the workbench. The warm, slightly flickering light of these lamps illuminated the room in a vague, almost mysterious way. The corners remained in shadow, long, dramatic shadows dancing across every object. The lampshades were clean, wiped daily, but years of tireless use had slightly faded them, giving them a matte texture. As the light filtered through these shades, it softened, becoming warmer, more intimate, almost embracing. There was also the sound the lamps made, that very faint hum, the low, constant murmur of the gas burning. This sound blended into the room's silence, filling the space like an almost imperceptible background music, the fundamental note of a lullaby. The workshop walls had once been painted dark green, perhaps a choice in keeping with Victorian fashion, but over the years the paint had faded, peeling in places, revealing older layers beneath, lighter tones, perhaps beige, perhaps cream-colored surfaces. There were countless shelves on the walls, all wooden, handmade. The shelves were not evenly spaced. Some were slightly crooked, some straight, some high, some low, but all were completely umbrella handles, skeletons woven from thin wire, rolls of colored fabric, balls of thread, needles of various sizes, sharp scissors, small metal pieces, screws, nuts, bolts. All kinds of tools and equipment sat silently on these shelves. Everything was organized. It might have looked chaotic and messy to an outsider, but the man who worked here knew exactly where everything was. Even with his eyes closed, he could tell which tool was on which shelf, which fabric was next to which color. In the middle of the workshop stood a large, impressive wooden workbench. This bench had been worn down by years, perhaps decades, of use, its surface covered with countless scratches, stains, burn marks, and dents. Each scratch told a story. Each stain held a memory, but the workbench was still sturdy, heavy, never budging from its place, as if it were part of the building's foundation. Various tools were currently on the workbench: a sharp knife, a few needles of different sizes, spools of colored thread, a small but sturdy hammer, a pair of pliers, and right in the middle, in a prominent position, a half-finished umbrella. The fabric had already been stretched over the frame. Some wires had been replaced. Some stitches had been sewn, but the job was not yet complete. It lay there like an unfinished work of art. In one corner of the room, right next to the window, was a small but efficient cast iron stove. Logs burned brightly inside the stove. The fire crackled from time to time. The wood creaked, and ash mixed into the air like a light dust cloud. The stove's pipe pierced the ceiling and rose upward, then made a sharp turn toward the wall and connected to the chimney. The pipe was blackened by years of soot buildup, giving it an almost shiny appearance. A small rug lay in front of the stove, worn, its colors long faded, but still soft and inviting to the touch. On this rug, the master would sometimes warm his feet, drink a cup of tea, and shake off the day's fatigue. The owner and sole employee of the workshop was a 62-year-old man named Thomas Beckett, who had spent the last 40 years of his life in this workshop, repairing umbrellas. Thomas was a man of medium height, slightly stooped, thinly built, with small, delicate hands and long, sensitive fingers. Years of fine work had calloused his fingertips, but these calluses were not thick. On the contrary, they were smooth, almost polished. His face was wrinkled, with deep lines around his eyes, furrows on his forehead, and lines at the corners of his mouth that drooped slightly, but still gave him a gentle expression. His hair was white, once dark brown, but having turned white years ago, and now completely snowy in color, combed back, neatly trimmed, combed with the same meticulous care every morning. Thomas wore a gray waistcoat over a white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his wrists visible, and around his wrists were old, worn cufflinks, once white, but now a cream color. His trousers were dark gray, made of wool, slightly worn at the knees, but clean and pressed. He wore brown leather shoes, which had been on his feet for years, repaired countless times, with replaced soles, but still comfortable and durable. Around his neck was a thin tie, loosely knotted but still neat, and this tie too had faded slightly from years of use. Thomas stood at the workbench, squinting slightly as he examined the fabric of the umbrella in his hand. As he inspected it, his fingers glided over the fabric, immediately detecting a small tear, a broken stitch, or a weakened area. He had been doing this job for years, and now the touch of his hands was a diagnostic tool. He could tell what kind of problem the umbrella had, not just by looking, but by touching and feeling it. This umbrella had been left by a customer early that morning. A middle-aged gentleman who had rushed in placed the umbrella on the counter and asked, "Will it be ready by evening?" Thomas nodded and said, "It will be ready, sir," and the gentleman thanked him and left. Now Thomas was finishing this umbrella, sewing the last stitches, tying the thread, cutting off the excess, and every movement was careful, slow, deliberate. There's no rush, he thought. There's time, and anyway, these things can't be done in a hurry. They require patience, attention, respect. Every umbrella was a story. Every piece of fabric had been part of someone's days, protecting them from the rain, providing shade from the sun, and now it was worn, old, but still valuable, still worth repairing. Renew. Thomas worked with these thoughts, his hands moving habitually, inserting and removing the needle from the fabric, pulling the thread, adjusting the tension. There was silence in the workshop, only the sound of the rain, the crackling of the stove, the hum of the lamps, and Thomas's breathing could be heard. Outside, footsteps passed by occasionally, people hurrying home, their shoes wet from the rain, their steps echoing on the stone pavement. But these sounds were distant, muffled, softening as they passed through the workshop's thick glass, taking on an almost dreamlike quality. Thomas heard these sounds, but he didn't pay attention to them. He was used to them. He had been working on this street for 40 years, and every evening the same sounds, the same rhythms, repeated themselves. The clock on the workbench showed 6:30. Thomas's normal closing time was 7, but today he could perhaps close a little early, because there was no other work waiting, no other umbrellas to finish, and outside it was getting dark. The rain hadn't stopped. He wanted to go home, make himself a hot cup of tea, sit by the stove. His old bones ached in the damp weather. His knees, hands, and back throbbed slightly. But Thomas didn't complain. It was part of his age, part of his job, and he was used to it, at peace with it. When he finished the umbrella, he checked it one last time, opened it to stretch the fabric, examined each wire of the frame, one by one, looking for any looseness or irregularities, and everything was in place, sturdy and smooth. As he closed the umbrella, the fabric folded with a soft rustle, the ribs interlocked, and the handle felt comfortable and balanced in his hand. It was a good job, he thought. The gentleman will be pleased, and this thought filled him with a slight sense of satisfaction, because Thomas took pleasure in doing his work well. He wasn't a perfectionist, perhaps, but he liked to work carefully, attentively, and without mistakes. He carefully placed the umbrella on a corner of the workbench, then wiped his hands on his old apron. This apron was also made of gray canvas, a thick and durable fabric, and over the years it had acquired countless stains, scratches, burn marks, and small holes. Each stain was a trace of a memory, each tear a piece of a story, each speck of dirt a witness to a day's work. But the apron was still functional, still protecting Thomas's clothes, still doing its job. For a moment he considered taking off the apron, thinking that perhaps it was time to close the door and end the day. But then he hesitated, his hand poised to remove it from the hook, but he paused. It wasn't quite 7 o'clock yet. Maybe it should stay open for a few more minutes. Maybe one last customer would come. Maybe someone needed help. Thomas didn't believe in such sudden decisions, impulsive action. He didn't break his routine. He didn't shake his discipline. He closed on the dot, on the hour, as usual. There were rules in life. There was order, and this order was comforting, reassuring. He walked slowly toward the window, his steps heavy, his legs slightly stiff, his joints rigid. The fatigue of standing for long hours, of working at the counter, weighed on him, on his shoulders, his back, his knees. When he reached the window, he pressed his hand against the glass. It was cold, icy, and he immediately felt the moisture in his palm, a damp texture. To wipe away the condensation, he moved his hand. It fell. He moved it gently, in circular motions, opened a small window for himself, and looked outside. The street was wet, completely soaked, water flowing from the sidewalks like a riverbed. The rain was still falling, relentlessly, tirelessly, with monotonous determination. The buildings on the opposite side looked dim and indistinct, as if they were disappearing into the fog. Some of their windows were lit, glowing with yellow light, families having dinner, gathered around the stove in their warm homes. Some windows were dark, empty, abandoned. The street lamps were lit, but their light was weak, yellowish, insufficient, and this light shattered and broke into pieces among the raindrops as it hit the ground. A few people walked on the sidewalk, umbrellas over their heads, black, brown, navy blue shadows moving forward with quick steps, no one lingering, no one stopping to look around. Everyone wanted to go somewhere, to reach somewhere, to take shelter somewhere warm. to get the autumn cold penetrated to the bone. Thomas took a deep breath, his chest slowly expanding, his lungs filling with air. Then he exhaled slowly. There was a kind of peace in this breathing, a kind of acceptance, a kind of harmony with life. This was his life. Every day the same, every evening the same, every morning the same, awakening, the same breakfast, the same journey, the same counter, the same hands, the same fabrics. But this monotony, this predictability gave him comfort, gave him security, gave him peace. There was no uncertainty, no surprises. Everything was in its place, under control, predictable. When he was a young man, in his 20s, he might have sought excitement, sought adventure, dreamed of going to distant lakes. But as he grew older, as his hair turned gray, those desires faded, evaporated, replaced by a quiet contentment, simple pleasures, the security of daily routines. Now he needed peace, not adventure, stability, not excitement. Just as he was about to move away from the window, he caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of his eye. Someone was coming from the end of the street. Through the misty ventilation, it was impossible to see who it was under the umbrella. Just a silhouette, a dark shape, but the steps were slow, unhurried, measured. Thomas waited, stood still, held his breath. Maybe it wasn't a customer. Maybe they were just passing through the street, heading to the next building. But he waited anyway, patiently, because if it was a customer, and he had closed the door early, that person would be disappointed. They would have come in vain, in the rain, in the cold. And Thomas didn't do things like that. He thought of others before himself. Empathy was in his nature, kindness the foundation of his character. The figure drew closer, step by step, and now Thomas could see more clearly. It was a young woman, perhaps between 25 and 30 years old. He couldn't quite tell, but she was definitely young. She was slender, elegant, of medium height, wearing a dark, perhaps black hat. She had a long cloak on, which looked heavy, as if it had absorbed the rain. And in her hand, strangely, she held both an open umbrella and another umbrella with a broken handle and torn fabric. The second umbrella was clearly damaged, unusable, but the woman carried it carefully, almost protectively. She approached the workshop door, didn't enter immediately, hesitated, as if unsure whether to go in. For a moment she looked at the shop window, perhaps not seeing Thomas because of the thick fogging on the glass, perhaps seeing only her own reflection. Then she took a deep breath. Determination came into her movements. She straightened her shoulders, leaned forward, and gently opened the door. The bell rang softly, that familiar, melodic sound Thomas had heard for years. As the door opened, damp air rushed in from outside, a cold wind, the smell of rain, the smell of wet stone, the smell of autumn. The woman crossed the threshold and stepped inside carefully, placing her feet gently on the floor, trying not to carry any water in. She closed the door gently behind her, and the bell rang again, but this time more softly, a closing sound, the sound of a farewell. The woman paused, held her breath for a moment, stood still and waited, as if gathering herself, preparing her mind. Then she slowly closed her open umbrella. This umbrella was sturdy, not new, but in good condition, useful, and placed it in the old wooden umbrella stand next to the door. Then she adjusted the hat on her head, pushed it back slightly, brushed the brim with her hands, and let the accumulated raindrops fall to the ground. The drops splattered on the wooden floor, forming small pools of water. Thomas slowly turned toward the counter, assuming a professional stance. A gentle smile appeared on his face, a smile that was sincere, heartfelt, but not exaggerated, not theatrical. It was simply a kind greeting, a warm welcome. He bowed his head slightly toward the woman, almost respectfully, old-fashioned courtesy. "Good evening," said Thomas, his voice low, soft, his throat a little tight with age, but clear, distinct, warm, inviting. "How can I help you?" His eyes drifted to the broken umbrella in the woman's hand, with professional curiosity, but without questioning or judgment. The woman took a step forward, and now Thomas could see her more clearly. Her face was pale, slightly flushed, perhaps from the cold, perhaps from emotion. Her eyes were dark brown or perhaps dark green. Thomas couldn't be sure, but there was a kind of seriousness, a kind of inwardness in those eyes, as if the woman was lost in thought, had forced herself to come here. Her hair was dark brown, pulled back, a few strands falling onto her face, and these strands were wet from the rain. Her face was beautiful, but it had sharp features, thin lips, prominent cheekbones, a slightly pointed chin, and these features gave her a determined yet sensitive look. "Good evening," said the woman, her voice low, but different from Thomas's, younger, livelier, yet still with a kind of shyness, a kind of hesitation in it. I hope I'm not too late." She paused for a moment, then continued, "Your closing time is 7. I saw it on the sign outside." "Yes, ma'am," said Thomas. 7, but it's not 7 yet. There are still a few minutes left, and it doesn't matter if you're late anyway. If you need any help, I'm here." His smile deepened, and he extended his hand toward the counter in an inviting gesture. "Please come closer. What can I help you with?" The woman took a few more steps forward, now standing opposite the counter, and placed the broken umbrella on it, carefully, gently, as if it might break. And Thomas looked at the umbrella, his eye immediately going to the places that needed repair. The handle was broken, detached from the shaft. There were several tears in the fabric. One wire in the frame was bent. Another was broken. But overall, the umbrella was still salvageable. It could be repaired. It might take a little time, but it could be done. "And this umbrella," said the woman, then paused, a kind of tremor in her voice. Her throat seemed to tighten, and Thomas waited, patiently, without rushing her, waiting for her to continue. The woman took a deep breath, then spoke again. "This umbrella was my mother's. My mother died last year, and this M was her favorite thing. She used it every time it rained. She used it for years, and now," she paused, her eyes slightly watering, but she didn't cry. She just paused, then continued. "Last week it broke in the wind. I wanted to get it repaired. I didn't want to throw it away, because it's not just an umbrella. You know, it's a memory, a connection." Thomas shook his head slowly, with understanding, and there was compassion in his eyes, but not pity, just understanding. "I understand," he said softly, "and you're right, this isn't just an umbrella, it's a memory, and memories are important. Protecting them is important." He reached for the umbrella, his fingers touching the fabric lightly, gently, as if respecting the woman's feelings. "It's a beautiful umbrella," he said. "The fabric is high quality, silk blend. It was once an expensive item, handmade frame, old-fashioned craftsmanship." He turned the umbrella slightly, examined the top, and bottom, looked at every detail. "Can you repair it?" asked the woman, her voice hopeful, but also hesitant, as if afraid of being refused. "I mean, I know it's badly damaged, but if it's possible, if you can do it, I'd be very grateful." Thomas continued to examine the umbrella, checking the handle, touching each wire of the frame, measuring the tears in the fabric, and making calculations in his head. How long it would take, what materials would be needed, whether it could be done. Finally, he looked up at the woman. "Yes," he said, "I can repair it. It won't be easy. It will take time. The arm needs to be replaced. Some wires need to be replaced. The fabric needs to be patched. But it can be done, and I'll do my best. I promise." The woman's face lit up. A sense of relief and happiness appeared in her eyes, and a small smile formed on her lips. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you so much. This is very important to me." She paused for a moment, then asked, "How long will it take?" Thomas thought for a moment, silently, making calculations in his head. Repairs usually took a few days, because sometimes he had to source special materials, place orders with suppliers, wait for them to arrive, and then there were always other jobs too, waiting customers, repairs that needed to be completed. A queue, everyone waiting their turn. But in this woman's case, given the importance of this umbrella, its emotional weight, perhaps he could make an exception. Perhaps now was the time for humanity, not for following the rules. Perhaps he could start right now, immediately. He looked out the window, squinting into the darkness, into the rain. The rain was still falling, relentlessly, monotonously, falling from the sky. He had no real hurry to get home. No one was waiting for him there. His wife had died long ago, 20 years ago, and he had never had children. There were only empty rooms there, silent walls, a cold bed, a lonely night, and maybe, just maybe, he could spend this evening here, in this warm workshop, repairing this meaningful umbrella. It would be work, and also a kind of meaning, a kind of human connection, a kind of purpose. "If you'd like," said Thomas, his voice careful, offering, "I can start now. Tonight I'll get right to work. It'll take a few hours, of course. Maybe 3, maybe 4, longer, if there are tricky parts. And it'll be ready by midnight, maybe a little before." He paused, offering the option, "If you prefer, you can leave it and come back for it in a few days, on Thursday, for example, or Friday, whichever you prefer. It's your decision." The woman was surprised. It was clear from her face. Her eyes widened. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Her lips parted slightly, as if she had never expected such a generous offer, had never even imagined it. "Tonight?" she said, her voice filled with astonishment. "But it will be too late, sir. You'll be talking about midnight. I'll tire you out. And I can pick it up in the morning. Waiting another day is no problem. I'm really not in a hurry." Thomas smiled, a gentle, warm "I'm in no hurry either," he said, calmly. "I'm an old man. Sleep gets the better of me most nights anyway. And this job," he looked at the umbrella, "this job needs doing right away. I don't like putting off jobs like this, especially ones this important. They shouldn't be left to pile up. They should be done now. If it bothers you, of course, but I'll do it. Tonight, here, I promised you." He paused, looked into the woman's eyes, sincerely, honestly, then added gently, "And maybe you'll stay. Wait here, it's raining outside. It's cold because this umbrella is yours, your mother's, and the repair process belongs to you too. Maybe you want to watch, you want to be part of the process. Maybe you want to remember your mother, You want to talk. Sometimes it's good to talk. The woman was silent for a moment, completely silent, thinking deeply. Thomas saw various emotions pass over her face: hesitation, hope, surprise, gratitude, and finally a decision crystallized, and a dead sense. Her face softened, her shoulders relaxed slightly. "If you'll allow me," she said softly, "I'd really like to stay. I'd like to watch how it's repaired, how life is breathed back into my mother's umbrella." But she paused. "Would I be a burden? A nuisance? I mean, would you be comfortable working, or do you need silence?" "No problem at all," Thomas said sincerely. "On the contrary, sometimes it's nice to have someone watching, someone there. It breaks the loneliness. Time aces faster. You don't have to talk constantly. Sometimes just being there is enough. Your presence is enough. That's a kind of company. And maybe you'll tell me the story of this umbrella. Tell me about your mother, what kind of woman she was, what she liked, what she did. I love listening to people's stories, their memories, because every story is a treasure. Every memory is precious." She stepped out from behind the counter, her steps light and slow, her knees still a bit stiff. She walked toward the door, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. When she reached the door, she turned the key in the lock. It made a metallic sound. She locked the door securely. Then she gently turned the wooden sign on the window. The side that said "closed" faced outwards. No new customers would come now. The night belonged only to them. She turned back, went to her lamps, carefully, slowly raised the wicks a little more. The flames grew. The light spread more powerfully. The room became brighter, but still dim, still retaining that warm, intimate atmosphere. The shadows receded slightly, but did not disappear completely. Dancing in the corner, the woman slowly removed her cloak from her neck. First one shoulder, then the other, revealing a dark blue dress underneath. The dress was simple, unadorned, without embellishments, lace or embroidery, but it was immaculate, carefully ironed, with a collar and long sleeve. The dress suited her perfectly, showing off the graceful lines of her body, but without being exaggerated. It was measured, modest, in keeping with the morals of the time. She carefully hung the cloak on the old wooden hook by the door, straightened it, then adjusted her hands, evened down her dress, and turned back. She came to the counter, stood there, gently clasped her hands in front of her, and waited patiently. Thomas turned to the counter, took a deep breath, focused his mind on the task. He picked up the umbrella again and examined it carefully. He decided to start with the handle first, because the handle was the most critical, most fundamental part. Without the handle, you cannot hold the umbrella. You cannot open it. You cannot use it. The umbrella ceases to be an umbrella. And this handle was completely broken, cracked, detached from the shaft. Beyond repair. He walked over to the shelves, his eyes scanning the wooden shelves. Arriving at the handle section, he examined several different handles, compared them, measured them. Finally, he chose one, a wooden handle made of beautiful walnut, curved, with a grip. It wasn't exactly like the old one, but the style was very close, from the same period. The same craftsmanship, the same thickness, the same weight, the same balance. He brought this arm to the counter, carefully placed it next to the umbrella, compared them, held them side by side, checking if they matched, if the size was right. "Do you think this arm fits?" he asked the woman, seeking her opinion, because the umbrella was hers after all. "It's not exactly like the old one. The shape is a little different, but the style is the same, similar, from the same period, the same craftsmanship. The woman leaned forward slightly, looked carefully at the handle, touched it lightly with her finger, then looked at the umbrella, at the shaft, then back at the new handle. She compared them in her mind, remembered the old handle, evaluated it. She slowly shook her head, approving. "Yes," she said softly, "it fits. It's beautiful, elegant, and the old handle was completely broken anyway, unusable, beyond repair. This one actually looks better, sturdier." He paused, then his eyes misted over slightly, adding with a slight tremor in his voice, "My mother really loved this umbrella, you know. She would take it with her every morning to work, even if it wasn't raining, just for safe, because she said you never know when the weather will change in London, when it will rain. She said the weather forecast lies, and she was always right. She used her umbrella most of the time. It would suddenly start raining in the afternoon, but my mother was prepared. She had her umbrella with her." Thomas listened, attentively, respectfully, nodding his head in understanding. These memories were precious. They showed his mother's character, her practicality, her foresight. He took the shaft and the handle in his hands, ready to assemble them. First, he had to remove the old handle, take it off completely, carefully remove the screws. He chose a small, thin screwdriver from the shelf for this task, took the screwdriver in his hand, and held the umbrella steady. He turned each screw carefully, slowly, counterclockwise, without forcing it, patiently, without rushing, because the old screws could be rusty, stuck, fragile. If he forced them, they would break and cause more damage. One screw came out, then the second, then the third, each one tapping lightly on the workbench as they fell. The old arm finally came off completely, and Thomas gently set it aside. Perhaps the parts could be used for another repair. Then he took the new arm in his hands, aligned it with the shaft, tested the angles, and found the perfect position. He screwed the bolts into the new holes, one by one, then used the small screwdriver to tighten them, turning them patiently, ensuring each bolt was tightened evenly so it wouldn't be unbalanced. When he was done, he checked it, gently shook the arm, pulled it, pushed it, testing for any looseness or play, but everything was solid, perfectly seated, no looseness at all. It was a good job, a perfect connection. The woman watched, her eyes on Thomas's hands, how they moved, how they seemed to know every movement. No hurry, but never stopping, always progressing. "You've been doing this for a very long time," she said. Not a question, but an observation. "Yes," said Thomas, without stopping his hands. 40 years, maybe a little more. "I took over this workshop from my father, who took it from his father, my grandfather, who took it from someone else before him. It's a family business, been here for years." He paused, tightened another screw, then continued. "I used to come here as a child, watching my father work. Then I gradually learned, first simple tasks, then more complex ones. And then my father grew old, retired. I took over, and now I'm growing old." There was a slight smile on his face, but it wasn't sad, just accepting. "Don't you have children?" the woman asked. "Someone to take over?" Thomas shook his head slowly, negatively. "No," he said. "I never married, never had children, and I guess this workshop will close with me. The umbrella repair business isn't what it used to be. People buy new ones, prefer to throw them away, don't think about getting them repaired, and so the work is decreasing, the demand is decreasing." He paused, then added, "But I keep going because this is my job, my life, and some people still come, People like you, people who know the value of their umbrella. The woman said nothing, but Thomas saw understanding and sadness on her face, and that was enough. There was no need to speak. Silence was also a form of communication. He finished the arm. Now he had to move on to the frame's wires, replace the broken one, straighten the bent one, and this work was more delicate because the wires were thin, easily broken, and balance was important. Each wire had to be equally taut so the umbrella would open properly. He took the wire spool from the shelf, thin metal wire, flexible but strong, and cut the required length from the spool, bent the ends, formed small loops, and attached these loops to the connection points of the frame. Tightened them. He removed the broken wire, replaced it with a new one, straightened the bent wire, gently pressing it with pliers to shape it. Every movement was careful, slow, and deliberate, because a single mistake could ruin the entire balance. The woman spoke, her voice soft, almost a whisper. My mother worked in a tailor's shop, she said, a small shop here in Clerkenwell, a few streets away. She sewed dresses, mended clothes, and refurbished people's old garments. My father died early, when I was little, and my mother raised me alone, on the shop's income, and we were poor, but we were happy. She paused, took a deep breath, then continued. A customer gave her this umbrella as a gift. To thank her, my mother had sewn her wedding dress. It had turned out beautifully, and the customer was very pleased and gave her this umbrella as a gift. Thomas listened, his hands working steadily, and he felt the emotion in the woman's voice. That longing, that love, and these feelings touched Thomas too, because he too had lost people, his family, his friends. Over the years, everyone had gone, and only memories remain. Your mother was a good person, said Thomas, and you're lucky. You remember her. You remember her love. Yes, said the woman. I am lucky, and every time I see this umbrella, I remember her, her hands, her face, her voice, and that's why I was so sad when it broke, as if a part of me had broken, and I was afraid it couldn't be repaired. Severed. It will be fixed, said Thomas, and not just the umbrella, but perhaps that break inside you will be fixed, a little too, because sometimes objects are not just objects, they are carriers of our feelings, our memories, and fixing them fixes us too. The wires were finally finished, the frame repaired and reinforced. Now it was time to move on to the fabric. The tears in the fabric had to be patched, and this was perhaps the most delicate, most critical part of the whole process, because the fabric was thin, delicate, old, and worn. Years of use had weakened it, faded its color, robbed it of its vibrancy under the sun and rain. The patches had to be strong and durable, yet invisible, unnoticeable, blending in as seamlessly as possible with the original fabric. It was an art, a balancing act, requiring both strength and grace. Thomas walked over to the shelves, wandered among the wooden shelves, and came to the fabric roll section. He carefully pulled out several different rolls, fabrics in similar colors, dark green, shades of gray, some light blue, some darker. He held them up to the umbrella fabric, comparing them in the dim light, examining which one was more compatible, which one was a closer match. She tried each one, put it back, picked up another. Finally, she turned to the woman, holding the options in her hand. Which fabric do you think is better? She asked gently, seeking her opinion, because it was her umbrella after all, and her taste mattered. Which of these three is closer, more suitable? The woman got up, approached the counter, and leaned forward carefully. She touched the fabrics, her fingers gently and slowly gliding over the surfaces, feeling the texture, assessing the thickness. Then she looked at the original fabric of the umbrella, then back at the options, comparing them with her eyes, searching for harmony in her mind. She finally chose one, the middle one, and pointed to it lightly. This one, she said softly. I think this one is closer in color, very similar in tone. And the texture is similar too, the same weight, the same thickness. Thomas nodded in agreement, smiling slightly. He would have chosen the same fabric, exactly the same. The woman had a good eye. She saw the color match. She recognized the quality. Good, he thought to himself. Good choice. She took the fabric in her hands, spread it out on the table, and picked up her sharp scissors. She carefully prepared small patches, a separate patch for each tier. The sizes had to be just right, neither too big nor too small. Too big would look bulky, too small wouldn't be enough. She measured each piece carefully, then cut clean, straight line. Then she threaded the needle fine, durable thread, perfectly matching the fabric in color, almost invisible in tone. She doubled the thread, tied a knot at the end, tested the needle, then began sewing. Each stitch had to be small, very small, tight, leaving no gaps, regular, but most importantly, it had to be invisible, undetectable, yet hold the fabric securely, closing the tape. Thomas knew this deeply. He had been doing this work for years, his hands moving habitually, almost automatically. He inserted the needle into the fabric, pulled it out, inserted it, pulled it out. A rhythm formed, regular like a metronome, repetitive like meditation. This rhythm blended into the silence of the workshop, with the monotonous rhythm of the rain, the periodic crackling of the stove, the constant hum of the gas lamp, the sound of the needle, the rustle of the fabric, the pulling of the thread, all came together, creating harmony, a symphony, a quiet but beautiful melody. The woman sat down on an old worn chair next to the workbench. Thomas had shown her gently, "Please sit down. Make yourself comfortable. It may take a while," he had said. The woman sat down, grateful, her feet tied, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes mostly on Thomas, watching his working hands, sometimes drifting to the umbrella, her mother's umbrella, the memory being reborn. Sometimes she looked at the window, outside, at the darkness, the rain, the street. Sometimes her eyes would lose focus, lost in her own thoughts, memories, the past, her mother, childhood. It was warm in the workshop, a pleasant warmth, the stove heated well, the flames dancing merrily. This warmth physically relaxed the woman. The tension slowly left her body. Her shoulders relaxed, her jaw relaxed, her breathing deepened, became rhythmic. She felt peaceful, safe in this small workshop, in the presence of this old master. Time passed. Minutes accumulated. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20, maybe half an hour, maybe more. No one looked at the clock. Time was irrelevant now, meaningless. It wasn't just the work that mattered. It wasn't just the repair. It was this process, this sharing, this quiet companionship, this human connection. Thomas spoke occasionally, breaking the silence slightly, sharing his knowledge. "This fabric is really high quality," he said at one point, without taking his eyes off his work. "It's a silk blend, durable if it's well cared for, protected. It will last for years, maybe 10 years, maybe more. Of course, how it's used is important. It should be handled with care, not exposed to harsh winds." Or a little later, "This sewing technique is very old. ancient, passed down from our great grandfather. It's not taught in schools anymore, not discussed in universities. There are modern methods, machines, but I know it. I learned it from my father, who learned it from his father. This knowledge is passed down from generation to generation, like an oral tradition. The woman listened attentively, absorbing every word, sometimes asking questions, curious and interested. How did you learn it at first? She asked. I mean, when did you sew for the first time? Did you struggle? Thomas smiled, slightly nostalgic. My first stitch. I was 10, I think, maybe 11. My father showed me. I tried. My first attempts were terrible, crooked, loose, but my father didn't get angry. He was patient. He said to practice, to take time, and I did. I practiced a little every day. Years passed, and here I am now. He paused, cut the thread, and started on a new piece. Is it hard? The woman asked. No, said Thomas, it's not hard. Actually, the technique can be learned. Your hand gets used to it. What's hard is being patient, taking your time, because this work can't be rushed. It takes time. It takes attention. At one point, the woman stood up, walked slowly to the window, and looked outside curiously. The street was still wet, glistening in the light of the street lamps. It was almost empty, only one or two dark silhouettes passing by in the distance, hurrying home toward the warmth. From afar, the sound of a carriage could be heard, the hooves of 2 horses, the solid rhythmic sound of the wheels on the stone road. Then it faded away, disappeared, and silence fell again. It's still raining, the woman said softly, almost to herself. It doesn't seem like it will stop. It will probably last until morning. November, said Thomas, still sewing as he spoke. It's always like this, classic English November. Rain, fog, cold, damp. Darkness falls early, but we're used to it. We're Londoners. We know these things. We grew up with them. He smiled slightly to himself. This weather isn't bad for me. Actually, it's good for business. People use umbrellas a lot, and as they use them, they wear out, break, tear, and they come to get them repaired. In summer, there's much less work. It rains less. People don't use umbrellas, and repairers like me sit idle. 5. The woman turned back, sat down silently on her chair, deep in thought. What do you do in the summer? She asked curiously. In your free time, when there's less work. I read. I walk, said Thomas, tying the thread, completing another patch. I like reading books, novels, history books, poetry sometimes. I sit in the park, Hyde Park, under the trees, watch people think. In summer, I repair walking sticks more than umbrellas. Older people use walking sticks constantly, and they break over time. They wear out. The tip wears down. The handle loosens. Same logic, same skill. He paused, took a new thread, threaded it through the needle. Life is simple, actually, he said in a philosophical tone. People make it complicated, they confuse things, but fundamentally, at its core, it's very simple. You're born, you live, you work, you help others as much as you can, you love your loved ones, and then you die. You go, you become soil. The beginning and the end are clear. The middle is in your hand. The woman didn't say anything right away. She sat silently, thinking deeply about Thomas's words. There was a truth in those words, a simple but profound truth. A wisdom. Old people talk like this. She thought to herself, because they have seen so much, lived so much, suffered pain, endured loss, and no longer get caught up in unnecessary details or attach importance to superficial things. They see the essence, the core, the true meaning of life. In this perspective was valuable, instructive, even comforting. Thomas sewed on the last patch. The fabric repair was complete. Now he had to check the entire umbrella, every part, every connection. Nothing could be missing. He took the umbrella, opened it slowly. The frame expanded, the wires stretched, the fabric unfolded, and the umbrella formed a perfect circle. Smooth, balanced, beautiful. Thomas turned around it, looked at it from every angle, held it up to the light, checked the shadows. Were the patches visible? No, they fit perfectly. The stitches were invisible. Everything was in its place. It's done, said Thomas, and there was a kind of satisfaction, a kind of pride in his voice, but it was humble, unpretentious. He extended the umbrella toward the woman. Here you go, your mother's umbrella, ready again. The woman stood up, took the umbrella in her hands, and stood there for a moment, looking at it. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time she cried softly, quietly, tears rolling down her cheek. But these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of happiness, tears of relief. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling. Thank you so much. This is wonderful, perfect, as if it had never been broken. Thomas smiled. Not as if it had never been broken, he said, but repaired. And repaired things are sometimes more valuable than new ones, because they have a story, a past, and now a future too. The woman nodded, opened the umbrella, closed it, opened it again, tested it. Everything worked perfectly. And during this test, there was a smile on her face, a childlike happiness, as if she had received a gift. How much do I owe you? She asked. Please tell me, how much should I pay? Thomas thought about it. Normally, he might charge 2 shillings for such a repair, maybe 2.5, but this situation wasn't normal. This umbrella wasn't normal. This woman wasn't normal, and Thomas wasn't working for money tonight. In fact, he had never worked just for money. He had worked with passion, with love. 2 shillings will be enough, he said, but if that's too much, whatever you can give is fine, no problem. No, said the woman, 2 shillings isn't enough. You deserve much more, for your time, your effort, and for working so late. She took money out of her purse, gave him 3 shillings, and said, please take it. It's not enough. Thomas took the money, thanked her, put it in the cash register, and then turned to the woman. Use your umbrella well, he said, and remember your mother. Every time it rains, every time you open it, she will be with you, under this umbrella by your side. The woman nodded, her eyes filling again, but this time she didn't cry, she just smiled, a deep, heartfelt smile. I can't tell you how grateful I am, she said, not just for the umbrella, but for tonight, for this conversation, for everything. You're welcome, said Thomas, and I thank you too. Tonight was beautiful. I wasn't alone. I shared it with someone, and that's precious. The woman put on her cloak, donned her hat, took her umbrella, and walked toward the door. Thomas followed her, unlocked the door, opened it. Cold air rushed in from outside. The rain was still falling, but it seemed to have eased up. The woman crossed the threshold, then turned, thanked him once more, and then opened her umbrella, that repaired, reborn umbrella, and began walking in the rain. Her steps slow, no hurry, and Thomas watched her all the way to the end of the street until she disappeared into the darkness and then he closed the door. He returned to the workshop, slowly, thoughtfully, to the workbench. He stood motionless for a moment, looked around carefully, scanned the room with his eyes. Everything was the same on the surface. The workbench was still in the same place. The shelves were still arranged the same way. The stove was still burning in the same corner. The lamps were still giving off the same yellowish light. But something had changed. Something palpable. Something intangible yet present. Something in the air had changed. In the atmosphere. In the energy. Perhaps it was just his imagination. Perhaps it was just fatigue. Perhaps it was an illusion created by an old man's emotional moment. But Thomas felt a warmth, nonetheless. A real warmth. A feeling that warmed his heart. He had made a connection that night. A real connection with another person, and this feeling made him deeply happy, peaceful, satisfied. The loneliness had lessened a little. The weight had lessened a little. He began to tidy up the workbench slowly, methodically. He put the tools back in their places one by one, the screwdriver in the drawer, the pliers on the hook, the scissors on the shelf, the hammer in its box. He gathered the fabric scraps, the small pieces, the leftover bits from sewing, and threw them in the trash can. He carefully placed the spools of thread on the shelf in order of color, from red to blue, yellow to green. He arranged everything carefully, slowly, without rushing, because tonight would soon be over. It would end. Tomorrow would be a new day, new customers, new repairs, new stories. But now, at this very moment, she had to live this moment, feel this peace, savor this satisfaction. The past was gone, the future uncertain, but now was here, now was real. He began to extinguish the lamps, one by one, twisting the wicks until the flames died out. The room gradually sank into darkness. Shadows deepened. Objects turned into indistinct silhouettes. Only the light from the stove remained, a red, flickering, dancing light. The flames were still burning, crackling, showing signs of life. This light cast Thomas's shadow onto the wall, a long, crooked, indistinct shadow, like a ghost, Evan, like a second Thomas. He slowly approached the stove, stood in front of it, and looked inside curiously. The flames had diminished now. The wood was almost completely ash, charred, collapsed, having given up its energy. Thomas took the last piece of wood from the shelf, a thick log, heavy, and carefully added it to the stove, placing it among the flames. The fire came to life immediately, taking in the new fuel. The flames rose, the heat increased. He did this so that the workshop wouldn't be cold tomorrow morning, so that there would be a little warmth left when he entered, so that he would find an unfrozen space. A small gesture, a small thought, but it was important. He carefully took off his apron, passed it over his head, and folded it neatly. He hung it on the hook next to the door, the same place every evening, the same place he took it from every morning. He put on his jacket, also old, very old, maybe 10 years old, maybe 15. It had worn out over the years, its color faded, its sleeves seemed a little shortened. Maybe the fabric had shrunk, or maybe Thomas had become a little more hunched, but it was still a warm jacket, thick wool, comfortable, familiar, well. He took his hat from the shelf, a dark gray felt hat, and put it on his head at the angle he was used to. He wrapped his scarf around his neck, a woolen scarf his mother had knitted years ago, almost 40 years ago, but it was still sturdy, still warm, still with him. He walked to the door, made his final preparations. But before opening the door, he paused, looked back one last time, took one final glance at the workshop. He looked at that dim, quiet, familiar space, his workbench, his shelves, his walls, his stove. Every corner, he felt a deep sense of gratitude, appreciation, belonging. This place was his life, his identity, his meaning. He had given his years to this place, his best years, his youth, his middle age, and now his old age. And he still gave every day, and this giving kept him alive, gave him purpose, made him exist. He couldn't imagine himself without it. He finally stepped out the door, crossed the threshold, felt the cold air on his face. He pulled the door shut behind him. The hinges creaked one last time. He locked it carefully, turned the key twice, checked it was secure, then put the key deep into his pocket. He paused on the street for a moment, looked around, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. The rain had finally stopped. The sky had cleared a little. The clouds had partially dispersed, but the air was still wet, damp, thick with moisture. It was cold, the cold penetrating to the bone. Thomas took a deep breath. His chest expanded, his lungs filled with fresh air, moist air. Then he slowly exhaled, the steam from his breath visible. It was time to go home now, time to rest, time to sleep. His house was a few blocks away, not very far, a 10-minute walk, maybe 15 with his old legs. And this walk would do him good, speed up his circulation, exercise his legs, move his joints, rest his thoughts, help him digest and internalize the night. He started walking slowly, his steps heavy but steady, maintaining a regular rhythm. The cobblestone street was wet, glistening in the light of the street lamps, slippery and dangerous for old people. But Thomas walked carefully, each step deliberate, calculated, balanced. He planted his feet firmly on the ground, taking care not to fall or slip. The streets were completely silent at this hour. Midnight was approaching. Everyone was at home, warm in bed. Occasionally a sound could be heard in the distance, a door closing, someone coming home late at night, a cat meowing, hungry or cold, a car wheel in the distance, a late traveler. But mostly there was silence, a deep, heavy, peaceful silence. Thomas could hear his own footsteps, his steps echoing on the stones, the rhythmic clatter. Street lamps were lit at intervals, but their light was weak, faint, not illuminating the street sufficiently. There were many shadows, many dark places, but Thomas knew the way very well. He could find it even with his eyes closed. He would reach home even if he were blind. He was that familiar with it. He stopped for a moment in front of a house window. The light from the window was bright, warm, inviting. He looked inside involuntarily, not out of curiosity, but simply because he happened to glance that way. A family was sitting there, 4 people gathered around the fire, on the couch. The mother, father, 2 children, perhaps. They seemed to be talking, gesturing, laughing out loud. They looked cheerful, happy, connected to each other. Thomas watched them for a few seconds, maybe 10 seconds, maybe longer. Something stirred inside him, a longing, an old desire, a feeling of loneliness. But this feeling didn't hurt. It wasn't sharp. It didn't pierce him. It was just a slight melancholy, a soft sadness and acceptance. Because Thomas was alone, truly alone, having lived most of his life alone, and he had grown accustomed to it over time. Perhaps he didn't like it, couldn't like it, but he had accepted it, made peace with it. That was life. Everyone's story was different. Everyone's path was different. Everyone's destiny was separate. And he didn't envy this family's happiness. He just observed it, noted it, and continued on his way. He kept walking, turned right at the corner, and finally entered his own street, the familiar street. He recognized all the houses, knew each one very well, who lived in each house, which families, what they did for a living, who were friends, who kept their distance. Sometimes he would say hello in the mornings as he passed by. Good morning, he would say. Sometimes he would stop and talk about the weather, about Sudan, about work, but most of the time he just passed by, nodded slightly, because people were usually busy, in a hurry. Everyone had their own life, their own worries, their own joys. He finally came to his own house, stopped. It was a 2-story brick house, solid old, a typical London house. There was a shop on the ground floor, closed now, a carpenter's workshop, but not Thomas's, someone else's. There were flats upstairs, 2 flats actually. One was Thomas's, the other belonged to someone else. Thomas had lived upstairs for years. His was a small flat. 1 room, a kitchen, a bathroom, that was all. But it was enough for him. He didn't need more space. What would he do with a big house? He was alone anyway. He climbed the stairs, slowly, holding on, his knees aching a little, each step an effort. But he made it, reached the door, took out the key, unlocked it, and went inside. The house was dark and cold, but Thomas turned on the light, a small gas lamp, and the room lit up. The familiar furniture, chair, table, bed, wardrobe, everything was in its place, tidy and clean. He closed the door, took off his coat, hat, and scarf, and hung them up. He went to the kitchen, put water in the kettle, lit the stove, wanting to make tea, hot tea, which would warm him up and relax him. While the kettle was heating up, he went to the window, parted the curtains, looked outside. The street was quiet dark. Only the street lights were on, and Thomas thought about everything that had happened that night. The woman, the umbrella, the conversation, and these thoughts made him feel peaceful. The kettle whistled. Thomas made tea, filled his cup, sat down at the table, took a sip from the cup. The hot tea went down his throat, warmed his stomach, and Thomas sat there for a moment, drinking his tea, thinking, and among these thoughts were tomorrow's tasks, next week's plans. But these were distant, vague thoughts. What mattered now was this cup of tea, this silence, this peace. When he finished his tea, he washed the cup, dried it, put it away, and it was time to go to bed. He took off his clothes, put on his pajamas, lay down on the bed, pulled the blanket over himself, and rested his head on the pillow. The bed wasn't hard, but it wasn't soft either. It was just right. The same bed for years. His body was used to it. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and his thoughts slowed down, grew fuzzy, and sleep came. Slowly, gently, and Thomas surrendered, didn't resist, let himself go to sleep. And in his dream, he saw the old days, his youth, his father, the workshop, which was brighter and livelier back then, full of customers, with plenty of work, and he was young, strong, and eager. His father was teaching him things, paying attention, pointing things out, and young Thomas was learning, listening, imitating. Then the dream changed. Now he was old, alone in the workshop, but not lonely, because a customer was coming, and this customer was that young woman with his mother's umbrella, and Thomas was helping her, repairing it, talking to her, and this dream was peaceful, beautiful. And when morning came, Thomas woke up slowly, without difficulty, and his first thought was, today is a new day, and there is work in the workshop. That gentleman's umbrella will be delivered, and maybe new customers will come, and life will go on. Calm, monotonous, but meaningful. A valuable life. And now, dear listener, you too have completed Thomas's journey. You have heard the story of that rainy evening, the umbrella repair, the revival of memories, and perhaps this story has awakened something in you too. Perhaps you too have remembered your memories, your loved ones, your losses, and perhaps this remembrance has brought you peace. Now it is time for you to rest. Feel your body relax. Notice how your bed or chair supports you. Feel every muscle relax. Feel the tension melt away. Your shoulders are heavy. Your arms are relaxed. Your legs are at ease. Your feet are warm. Your body is resting, slowing down, preparing for sleep. Focus on your breath. Deep, slow breaths. Clean air with every inhale. The day's fatigue, leaving with every exhale. Breathe in, hold, release, and with each breath, you go a little deeper, relax a little more, get a little closer to sleep. Allow your thoughts to come and go. Don't try to hold on to them, just watch them. Like clouds, they come, they go, and you just watch. You don't interfere, you don't judge, you just watch. And slowly, the thoughts diminish, become blurred, fade away. Your eyes are closed, and in this darkness, there is peace, there is safety, because this is your place, your safe place. And here, nothing can harm you, no worry can disturb you. There is only silence, only peace, only stillness. And now, imagine yourself on that rainy evening in Thomas's workshop, in that dim light, by the warmth of the stove, and the sound of the rain is still audible, the drops hitting the window, and this sound soothes you, lulls you to sleep, a rhythmic, monotonous, peaceful sound. And now, just like Thomas, you have reached the end of the day. Your work is done, your responsibilities fulfilled, and now it is time to rest, time to sleep. And sleep comes, gently, slowly, enveloping you, embracing you, carrying you away. Your eyes feel heavy. You don't want to open them, because being closed is so comfortable, so peaceful. Your body feels heavy. You don't want to move, because being still is so comfortable, so peaceful. And you let yourself go. You don't resist. You surrender to sleep. And sleep takes you into a deep, comfortable, peaceful sleep. You dream beautiful dreams, peaceful dreams, or perhaps you dream not at all, just deep darkness, silence, and that too is beautiful. That too is peaceful. And when morning comes, you will wake up rested, refreshed, ready for a new day. But now, at this moment, there is only sleep. Only rest, only peace. Sleep now, drift into a deep sleep. No worries, no fears, just safety, just peace. Sleep, and sleep soundly through the night, until morning. Good night, dear listener. Good night, and sweet dreams.